This is like the best day ever. So many presentations have said something about deep sea corals. And even Sylvia Earle, she showed the ping pong tree sponge, and that thing is awesome. So thank you, Jason. I'd love to hear from you. It was a really great project that he did. Moses Tiango also did a project with us this year at the University of Redlands. He was digitizing ROV track lines to figure out where we have and have not surveyed yet, which is really useful for management purposes. I'd like, of course, to acknowledge my co-authors, Tom Horrigan, Renee King was King. She did the University of Redlands master's program too. We're all in the Office of Habitat Conservation. And I was really happy to hear from Joe Pica this morning from NCEI, because we use NCEI services quite a lot with representing deep sea coral data on our database, which Jason alluded to. Let's see. You've seen a lot of these today, but what I really want to emphasize is the geographical variety we have in US waters. I'm sure most people know the exclusive economic zone of this country is enormous, and in the waters around the country we have really different sorts of habitats, and this is somewhat iconic of the different habitats you'll see. A lot of species overlap, but there are a number of local trends. And I tried to pick photos here that have fish in them to really emphasize what Jason said about deep sea corals being very important for management. A lot of managed species, we think, rely on deep sea corals. It's a little hard to tell because ROVs are really bright and really noisy and fish move, but this is something that we're working on, is establishing the extent of the link between these. And that is why in fisheries at NOAA, we're studying deep sea corals. So the Deep Sea Coral Research Technology Program, part of NOAA, it uses science and exploration, shown here on the left, and that's field work, that's modeling, that's data analysis, that's annotating what is shown on these videos here, that's work like what Jason was doing. A lot goes into the science and exploration category. And this is a view of the Oceanic Explorer, which Joe talked about a bit this morning. We were hoping to show some footage since they're out right now, but they're on the East Coast, so they've come back up already. And the arrow represents the Deep Sea Coral Program relaying information discovered to resource managers. And what's shown in the images on the right side, on the top, those are managed species. So you have golden crab, you have wreckfish, those are off the coast of the Atlantic. And on the bottom, those images are anthropogenic debris of some sort. You have line wrapping around coral, you have trash that the squat lobster is trying to deal with. So these are real threats to deep sea coral, and fishing is a major threat, bottom contact fishing. So we work a lot with the fishery management councils, and if you haven't heard of these, they're basically the entities that regulate where, when, and how people can commercially fish in federal waters. So what you're seeing here, this is not anything about protection yet, this is just the jurisdiction of each council. So there are 8 of them. You can see the Western Pacific has almost half of US waters to deal with, and they're very remote. North Pacific has quite a large share too. And then the other regions have somewhere between 3 nautical miles to 200 nautical miles to manage. This set of pie charts here just shows a depth distribution for all of these councils. So the Western Pacific is very deep. Those waters are not really like any of the other council regions. So not only does it have the most, but it has extremely deep water. Whereas if you're looking in the Gulf of Mexico, that's a much shallower profile. It's very different. So in addition to being very different on the surface around the country, each region's deep water is pretty different too. So we're trying to appreciate these differences when we collect data for management purposes. So if you're asking how much of the US waters is protected. That, of course, varies by region. And so here's the western half of our country. The Western Pacific actually protected its deep sea coral researches, and this is specifically from seafloor contact trawling or more restrictions on whether you can touch the seafloor with fishing gear. So it's all very seafloor specific. 1983, they protected the whole thing. Other regions have protected less, and in the North Pacific, right there, you can see that quite a big chunk of North Pacific protected seafloor is protected for deep sea coral. That was the purpose of protecting it. And if I show you the eastern coast, then you can see a different profile. So the western regions tend to have a lot more area, and in general, they've protected more of their area from seafloor contact fishing. On the east, protection has come more recently, and this is a tiny bit misleading because 3 regions have protected a lot of area recently. It's just not in practice yet. That will happen next year. And if anybody has a guess, I'm really curious what you think is the total seafloor protected, the total percentage of seafloor protected in the US, given this kind of profile. Not specific for deep sea coral, just in general. Somebody's got to have a guess. 7? Look, the Western Pacific has 100% protected. That's half the EEC. It's a little higher. But you got the first digit, or yeah, the 7's right. Here's some murmurs. Yeah, it's 73%. So that's a lot of seafloor that's protected from trawling or potentially other fishing seafloor contact activities. And the blue hatched line, the mid-Atlantic, they really could have benefited from Jason's analysis when they were trying to determine what is a canyon, because that's where the deep sea coral are in that region, and that's what they wanted to protect. So that's one reason we're really happy to have Jason and other people's work to help us. So I'm not going to go through all the regions of the country, but I will show you a little bit about the North Pacific, just so you can see. This is our national database. The dots are all the deep sea coral and sponge records that we have, so it's not necessarily individual corals, but we have a lot in the Alaska region because they still do trawl surveys to try to figure out how the stocks are doing of fish. So a lot of these dots come from trawl surveys where coral are actually dragged up and bycaught. So we know a lot about this region for that purpose. The gray area behind is what's protected, and I'll get into that a little bit more, but you can't trawl in any of these gray areas unless you're a NOAA survey vessel. This is what the habitat looks like. So another reason I'm focusing on Alaska is because we're about to have put a lot of money into an initiative there that will focus on this region, in particular the Aleutians, because it's an incredibly rich, biodiverse area with a lot of coral. And if you can see the part of this big island chain to the south that's not yet protected, we don't know much about it, and we think it might be very, very productive fish habitat. This is the reason why we're about to put some money into studying it, because that's bycatch of coral, and that could be a nice house for a lot of fish if it were still there. So here's what protections for the seafloor in Alaska have looked like over the years. You can see there's a timeline on the right side, and so I'm going to step through 4 different time slots and show you the cumulative view at the end. So these protected areas will come and go. There's a depth chart sort of to the bottom right. So before 1996, before we had a thing called essential fish habitat, not very much was protected. A little bit here and there. It was pretty shallow. Then between 1996 and 2000, a fair bit more area was protected. Two of these areas were closed to trawling. One was closed to all kinds of fishing that contacts the seafloor. And you can see where they are here. Then after 2000, there's only one trawl closure put in. But where Alaska really went crazy was here between 2006 and 2010. They protected quite a lot of their seafloor. I think something like 58% or so is protected, and you can see the depth distribution. So what we're really concerned about is the middle of that south area of the Aleutian chains, where there's not many protections and there's a lot of coral. Since 2010, really not any other spatial protections have been put in. Alaska is using some different sorts of fishing management techniques since then. So you can see this is the composite of everything. That's a lot of area. So it's a lot of really good information that's gone into decision making. And what a lot of the councils are doing now is assessing their past decisions. Now that we have more data and collecting more information, they're asking whether these are the right areas that have been protected. So I'll just go through this pretty quickly, but each region, I wanted to show you a kind of a profile of what's protected, and that's based on depth and based on the type of protection. So I'll show you the first one and then go through the other regions. The black is no seafloor trawling, so these enormous trawls that sort of drag along the bottom, that's prohibited in all of those kind of black percentages. So about 40% of the shallow water is prohibited from trawling, and a fair bit of really deep water, maybe like 60% deeper than 1,500 meters, protected from trawling. And then the hatched lines are no seafloor contact at all, so no long lining, nothing like that, no pots, no traps. And then Alaska doesn't have this, but there's gray for no fishing at all allowed. That's not rules that they've made there. And then that top set of bars is there's no regulations whatsoever. I want to note that the 200 meter to 1,000 meter zone is where you find the most deep sea corals and fishing co-occurring. People don't really fish too much deeper than 1,000 meters, and corals don't exist quite as much below 200 meters. So the sweet spot is that 200 meter to 1,000 meter zone. So here's a few other regions. You can see they look really different. So the Pacific, there's a lot of area that's not regulated, but they do have a lot of no trawl on their deep water. The Western Pacific is the weird one. 100% of that is no trawl. And then there's no seafloor contact a little bit, and some areas of no fishing as well. Then New England, this is going to change next year. New England just protected a huge area, but I can't show it yet because it's not implemented yet. Mid-Atlantic has protected quite a bit of area. All of their deep water, pretty much anything deeper than 450 meters is no seafloor contact. Then the South Atlantic, you can see this is the only region that really focused on that spot, the 200 meter to 1,000 meter area that's really sensitive for deep sea corals. A lot of their protected areas in that region. And then you can see the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico don't have very much protection for deep corals. But the Gulf of Mexico, that'll be changing next year. So that's exciting. This is the last slide I wanted to show you. So what do we do with all that information? Part of our mission is to collect data, research, turn it into something useful for the councils and other resource managers to use. But that's not all we do with it. We have a lot of outlets for education and outreach, and we're very interested in more. And that's one way we've been working really closely with Esri. This Learn ArcGIS lesson, Keith was absolutely instrumental in producing this thing, and it is awesome. It's 3 hours of educational delight. So if anybody you know is trying to learn some really cool techniques with Arc, check this out, because came out a few months ago, 6 months maybe ago. It's on the website, and it's a really awesome lesson. You get to dive into Hawaiian waters and play around with where the deep sea coral are distributed, where we know that they're distributed, where you may want to look for more. We also have a whole set of story maps that we've made throughout the years. There's a summary of protections, a little bit like what I just gave you. There's diving into Alaskan waters, there's New England, there's how we use predictive habitat models. There's a little bit more around some random topics like that. But we have story maps that are regionally made and nationally made, and we are producing more and more. So I think we have a little bit of work to do to get them all on the Esri story map centralized site, but that's a good resource that we have. In the southeast, we have a geodatabase that I know Dan can talk plenty about because he made it, and he'll be talking next. Not about that, though, but questions he'll be great at answering. This is a fabulous tool for assembling all kinds of data. So we have a lot of information on past surveys for deep sea corals or for other purposes that are on here. So those dots are all where we've had past surveys. And the blue hatched lines are where we've done surveying for bathymetry information. So that's one way we know where to send ROVs, is what does the seafloor look like, and that's where we have information. So now we know where we have it, where we don't, and then we can dig in when we want to know what it looks like in particular places. We have curriculum that we've developed and that our partners have developed. So National Marine Sanctuaries has a lot of curricula online that relate to deep sea corals. In this lower left corner, Greenfire is a nonprofit that has developed a curriculum, I think a year ago, that's very relevant for deep sea corals and spatial planning as well. So students, usually high school students, can think about deep sea coral and other activities in a spatial sense and whether activities overlap and how they might go about deciding what happens in each area. And then we just started using SeaSketch on the West Coast as another student-friendly activity. So students can look at all kinds of information in one location and then figure out where they want to dive with their ROV, and they can map a box and see what's been looked up before and what kind of resources are there in that box and what they might want to learn more about. Is there a seamount? Is there a ridge? What features should they check out? And then they can share that with their friends and compare dive sites. It's pretty cool. It's not quite live yet, but it's coming soon. And then our partners at Ocean Exploration and Research have a lot of videos and images that they've collected through the years. And these are the people that do Okeanos Explorer missions and dives. And so I'll show you just a snippet of one video. It's pretty fast-paced because they paired it with some fast-paced music. If you get a chance to listen to it in the whole 5 minutes, I highly recommend. But I'll just show you a little teaser, 20-second teaser. This is the Pacific Islands. They had a set of cruises out there from 2015 to 17 and found an incredible diversity. Nobody thought that there were this many corals and sponges out in the Pacific Islands. It was really exciting to see, and so they've put together a lot of media materials that we can use. And that's all that I had for you. Thank you.